Well, welcome to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Dr. Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, and today we're kicking off a series that we're calling Meet the Professor because we have so many remarkable instructors and professors, assistant professors, associate professors, and professors here at Middlesex. And I would love for our listening audience to get just a closer look at the individuals who make this college as exceptional as it is. So today my guest is Tad Lincoln, and Tad teaches economics here, and he's had a rich and full life before ever even joining Middlesex Community College. So this clearly wasn't your first job. What was your first job out of college?
First job out of college was as an engineer making nuclear components in Pennsylvania.
Nuclear components?
It's a little bit different from what I'm doing now, but it was...
what were the components of?
Little nuclear reactors that go in aircraft carriers and destroyers. So that was, it was a good job. And I did that for about 2 years. And I enjoyed it a lot, but it was in the mid-'80s. And at that time, things about Japan were really big in the media. So there was talk about Japanese management practices, Japanese economic prowess. There was, the Japanese buying up important landmarks in America. And even where I was working, we were working on quality issues. And I was part of I actually led a quality circle dealing with a certain quality issue. And we would read about this and they would say, the Japanese do a really good job with these quality circles and they do this, but we can't do that because our culture is different. And I'm like, why? Because I had traveled a little bit after I graduated from college in Europe. Compared to East Asia, Europe's very similar to America. So I was fascinated by that idea. And at the same time, I started taking graduate classes in town, studying management. And they were talking about Japanese management practices. And they would say, and the Japanese, well, they manage this way, but we can't do that here because our culture is different. I'm like, why? Why is it so different? So I really became fascinated with this country called Japan. And I said, I'm going there. So I did.
In what year did you go to Japan?
87 or 88.
So the first time I got to go to Japan was 83. Okay. And it to use the trite phrase, it blew my mind. So did it blow your mind?
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. What happened was I decided to enter a master's program in Hawaii called a Master's of Science in Japanese Business Studies. So I entered that program and I immediately became a little bit disillusioned because it was funded by a few major keiretsu, which are these conglomerates in Japan. And those companies determined the books we were allowed to read as part of our classwork and to do our projects on. And I said, this is a little fishy. So, and at the same time, I had an economics professor there. And I had gone through engineering school and never taken economics class. But I was fascinated with this economics class. And I became good friends with my professor. And it just turned out that he invited me out for some beers. It doesn't happen so much anymore these days, it seems. And he said, there's this university in Japan, and they're looking for an English professor. And we had somebody back out, and they need somebody really soon. And I was like, let's do it. So I was like, but I had one English class in my engineering program, and I did okay in it. I said, are they going to be okay with that? And he says, well, look, their English level is not very good. And as long as you're a native speaker and you are patient and you work well with the students, he said, that's really what it takes. And he actually had me prepare something for an ESL class that he was somehow involved with.
As a trial run. Let me interrupt you because we're going to have to go to a break. And when we come back, you can reveal the name of the university that you went to teach English at. So we'll be right back. Well, we're back to Middlesex Moments radio show and Tad Lincoln, and he's just unfolding the story of how he got to Middlesex by starting back at the point where he's in Hawaii and he's being asked if he'd like to teach English as a second language in Japan. So where did they want you to do this?
It was on the northern island of Japan named Hokkaido in the city of Hakodate. The university is Hakodate University. And not a high-level university, but specializing in business, commerce. But they needed somebody to teach ESL. So I went there, I interviewed, they hired me. Took a 1-year contract, they renewed it for a year, and I was itching to get back to America to get a master's degree, but something else happened while I was in Japan. So I had met a gentleman when I was in Hawaii, a Chinese guy, who taught at a university in Sichuan province in China, which is just east of Tibet. And he had actually asked me to teach English at his university in China before I went to Japan. And I told him, I've got this fascination with Japan. But while I was in Japan, something called the Tiananmen Massacre, there are various names, happened.
1989.
Yeah, so I was in Japan when that happened. And then some weeks later, I got a letter from my Chinese friend. And he said, every year we have 8 foreign native speakers of English here. For our coming semester, we have 0. Will you come? So I wrote him back. I said, sure. So I went to, I finished my job because the academic year in Japan ends at the end of March. Theirs starts about the same time ours does, beginning of September about. And so I went to China, and I taught there for a while too.
In both of those places, they're kind of remote from the major centers of commerce and government.
Exactly, which has lots of advantages if you want to learn language and culture. When there are a lot of foreigners around you, it makes it easier to fall back on communicating with them. And also there is a kind of culture that caters to the foreigners that doesn't exist in these small places. So you really get more immersed in the culture, and I think you learn a lot more. And you have more challenges too, but you learn from those challenges.
So if we go back to the idea of the Japanese culture allowed them to practice management in a way that we could never have practiced it in the U.S. Like what did you finally what was the way you analyzed that after having actually immersed yourself in a non-Tokyo culture?
Sure. As may be obvious to people who know about Japan, the culture is very group oriented. So, and people tend to be very loyal to that group, whether that group is their company or their group of friends or their family for sure. But they tend to be very loyal to that group, committed to that group. So they don't have as many issues when you're managing or dealing with quality issues of commitment to solving the problems because it's in the best interest of whatever that entity is, because they have that commitment. And that is a cultural trait that has its good points and bad points, but it is a feature of their culture, and you pick that up fairly quickly when you live there. So that's fundamentally
the big difference.
Yeah.
Do you know, I wonder if that's stood the test of time? I always wonder whether or not countries, and China is a perfect example, that are more and more porous. So more and more people, even in remote provinces like Sichuan, are exposed to the internet and can see the commercial world that the U.S. and Europe has been dwelling in for decades.
Absolutely.
Whether or not it'll stand the test of time. There was a recent story about the chair of Toshiba having to resign.
I saw that.
Yeah, and really part of it was there was so much emphasis on lean or Six Sigma or whatever they call it this week, that people were kind of fabricating the results, and that must have been a very humiliating experience for him.
Absolutely.
And then you begin to wonder if there's groupthink. If groupthink isn't the downside of loyalty to the
Absolutely.
group.
That's a big downside of Japanese culture and that group orientation. So they're loyal, and so that kind of culture definitely feeds into that kind of behavior because they are loyal. And when the boss says we need to look good, sometimes that kind of behavior comes out. So, yeah.
And then we have the antithesis, I suppose, which is the WikiLeaks thing, so we have an unclear relationship with whistleblowers, at the same time.
Right.
And that's somebody who steps outside of the group and says, wait a minute, something's going on here that everybody should know about.
Sure. That would be less likely in Japan.
I would think so.
To be, there's all kinds of people everywhere, but you'd be less likely to find that sort of behavior in a place like Japan. I would also add that, you mentioned about the internet and the openness. Those cultural roots run very deep. So, sure, you've got an evolutionary process that, things change over many generations, but, the internet's not going to change that fundamentally for a long, long time. It's something, it's just too deep. I mean, I don't know how to explain it, but it's very, very deep. So it won't, the internet's not going to turn them into open, individualist Japanese within a generation or so. It takes a long time.
Yeah. And are the Chinese even known for a management approach?
Not really. The Chinese even now suffer from a shortage of good managers. There's different levels you can talk about, but Chinese culture is very different from Japanese culture. Very different. So we tend to think of similarities because the Japanese use Chinese characters when they write, and a lot of Japanese superficial culture has come from China. But they're very, very different people. Very different people.
Well, I was going to say that we think of Asia, but Asia is just as different as Georgia is from Connecticut in our country. There's, Southeast Asia, Vietnam's very different from Laos, and Korea is certainly different from Japan, even though it's close, and Taiwan. Did you ever spend any time in Taiwan?
Well, I mean, a few weeks.
Just passing through?
Yeah.
But that's another example of a Chinese culture that is not, I'm sure, not very similar to what's going on in Sichuan.
Sure.
Right?
But it's fascinating to, there's everywhere, but the history is fascinating. When I was in Taiwan, I was living in Japan when I took a trip to Taiwan to visit actually another Taiwanese friend who I had met in Hawaii. And he, lived in Taipei, spent a lot of time there, and I traveled on my own to the south. And I was on this bus ride along this, basically a road that the Japanese carved into a cliff on the eastern side of the island when the Japanese had control over Taiwan for some decade. So the bus is cruising along there, and then we're in the middle of nowhere, and the bus pulls off to the side. Every once in a while there's a little place where a bus can get over. And the rock ledge was up more than halfway up past the windows, and a guy comes out of the woods, all right? And at that time, my Japanese was decent, and I didn't have any Chinese because I hadn't been in China yet. The guy comes out of the woods and starts talking to the bus driver in Japanese. And the guy they're carrying on this conversation in Japanese, and I didn't know the history at the time. So this is interesting. This is fascinating. And it turns out there's in central Taiwan, there are a large group of more or less indigenous Taiwanese who have very fond memories of the Japanese occupation and would just as soon go back to that, because to some extent they see the Kuomintang from China when they came over after the Civil War in China as a kind of occupation, and they feel that they were treated better by the Japanese than they are by the Chinese who flooded into the islands. And those are the kinds of experiences that, for me anyway, have made travel so fascinating and a very important part of my life. I mean, I love that kind of stuff.
I think it changes us wholly and completely. My wish for everybody is that they could travel internationally. Mm-hmm. And you just got back from Quebec. Even Quebec is is crossing.
It was amazing
a
to me at this point in my life that I had never been to Quebec, but I just got back late last night.
Yeah.
But at this point now, I've been to more than 40 countries and spent more than 7 years of my life overseas. So
which is significant.
Kind of good experience.
Yeah.
And you mentioned I teach economics. I do also teach international relations. and I'm hoping to bring a global business course online, which is taught at a couple other community colleges in the system by next fall.
I think that would be terrific.
Mm-hmm.
We have to take a break, but and we can talk about that when we get back, because we still have a little bit of time left in the show. Well, welcome back to Middlesex Moments, and a chance to meet Ted Lincoln, who teaches economics here at our amazing community college, and we're talking about his life story, really. And we left off with his talking about teaching a course in global business. So, why would you want to do that? What do you think is the benefit of that?
Well, I have a lot of experience. I mean, I didn't really go into everything that happened after I went to China and before I started teaching here. But I did go to grad school. After I left China, I came back. I went and I got a degree in international economics, actually. And then I went right back to work in engineering. So I was in what they called the international group of a company, the Torrington Company in Torrington, Connecticut, which no longer exists, but I was with them for many years. And so dealt with their international issues with Japan and Germany, and because we were in the auto industry, so we made parts that go into transmissions that go into cars. So,
and just let me interrupt. So you could make a part in Torrington that actually went into a German automobile?
Sure.
Because you often think of them as being the supreme automobile producer in the planet. But even they, this is the story, right? That all these things are integrated, right? We don't really get.
Absolutely. And at least at the time, the Germans had a lot of respect for Japanese automatic transmissions. Automatic transmissions became very popular in America before they became popular elsewhere, and so really General Motors was the leader in automatic transmissions, and so the Germans had a lot of respect and put GM transmissions in some of their cars for a while. And we made the bearings for those transmissions.
Yeah.
So, and when there were quality issues, we communicated with them. So I dealt with the Germans, sometimes the French, the Japanese, and then after a couple of years, the Chinese, as they started to come online. And then my company ended up sending me to China to make some auto parts in China.
Where in China?
That was in the Shanghai area. I was in Wuxi, which is, hour and a half. Trains are faster now, so it's an hour and a half outside of Shanghai, and then later I got sent back to Changzhou, which is along the same line between Shanghai and Nanjing. So 2 more stints in mainland China. But I'll say this: I mentioned earlier that I had taught in Japan at a university, and I really fell in love with that. I was there for 2 years, and I always said that I will go back and teach at a university or a college.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. So that was more rewarding to me than any of the other things that I've done. And so I'm very pleased to be able to get back.
So you got a little picture, actually, of the way that the Japanese organize colleges and universities, because I think in the popular culture in this country, we realize that people have to compete for places in the universities, and the tests are incredibly important, and they really bring shame upon their family if they don't get into the college or university they want to attend. And in China, a lot of at least, and I'm speaking from just a little bit of experience, so I could be way off in this. I think that there are colleges and universities dedicated to just single fields in a way. Like there could be a textile college or university. Surprisingly, you were in international business in your graduate degree. When I was there a million years ago, in the fall of '92, we spent a semester at Jingjing Maui Dashui, which translates as College of International Business and Economics. Sure. Right. So and so that's what it did, and they didn't do other things. That's fully and completely what they did. When you were in Sichuan, what was the nature of that college?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. It was a Dianzi Kuti Dashui, which is College of Electronics and Television, or University of Electronics and Television of China. And very focused.
Mm-hmm.
But they were starting, because they have a large defense industry contingent, so they were starting to tap that university for some of their relatively modern jets and things at about that time. You're absolutely right.
It's a completely different approach to higher education than we have, with the idea that everybody has to be educated across a general spectrum of subjects, and then they narrow it down and major in something. But
right. I would say most of the world is a little more focused in their college education. than we are. We've come to value value the fact that our younger graduates are going to get a smattering of a lot of different things and make sure they're relatively well-rounded. I mean, in graduate school, we're very focused, but they're even that way in undergraduate school. It seems in most of the world, from my experience. There's a lot of colleges I'm not familiar with, but at least from my experience, that's what I've seen.
When you were in graduate school in international business, did you have to produce proficiency certificates in a foreign language?
Maybe I did.
Yeah.
Maybe it was Japanese. Yeah. I mean, there was definitely a requirement like that. I guess it had to have been Japanese.
And
that's my better language.
I'm just I'm sort of like intrigued by the idea of knowing no Japanese at all, except possibly something simple like thank you, arigato, right?
Yeah.
And so you had to teach yourself while you're teaching others the very basics of English. So how did you manage to learn Japanese? Did you
Very
take courses? Slowly and
so
carefully.
I would say that most of my Japanese was learned in the bars and restaurants and other struggles in Japan.
And reading it? Can you read it at all?
No, I mean yes, but I'm not very good at reading it. I mean, Japanese is easier because Japanese has an alphabet actually too,
yes,
whereas Chinese doesn't. So I can read the alphabet, and I can know what it says, but it doesn't mean I know all of the words. But most of my ability is speaking ability. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I never had the desire to have exceptionally good grammar. It was always I wanted to be able to communicate and understand, and that was always my focus. And more comfortable. After spending 4 years studying French and conjugating verbs, I got pretty tired of studying language. I enjoy, over a couple beers, struggling with it with my phrase book and dictionary, and it sticks because you've got to use it. And that's much more fun to me than actually, I don't think actually knuckling down and studying languages is a lot of fun at all. Sometimes you have to do that sort of thing, but I've been fortunate to learn it on the fly. So.
Yeah, I think it's a good lesson to be talking about on the radio, because it's not impossible to learn a foreign language by just immersing yourself in it, and you figure it out.
Absolutely.
I think there was a radio program I heard the other day about kindergartens that are taught exclusively in Chinese, and how there's a risk there for somebody living in wherever they're living, Gillette, Wyoming or something, saying, okay, I'm going to send my 5-year-old to a kindergarten where the only thing that she's going to hear and learn to say is in Chinese. Sure. And I don't speak Chinese, but I also recognize how important it is for her to build out that other part of her brain.
Absolutely.
There's that
and
piece
the younger
of it.
you are, the more easily you absorb that language. And I think it has an effect on your intellect as you grow up. The ability to speak other languages somehow wires your brain, and and like Chinese, Japanese, and English are 3 languages, all of which come from different language groups. So if you can understand those languages, I mean, Japanese is essentially backwards compared to English. And they put the verbs at the end of the sentence. I mean, it's a whole different arrangement of language. So, and you've got to learn to think in that way. I think it really helps you to build your intellect. And if you're a kid growing up with it, if you learn the culture and the language together, I think it strengthens your intellectual capabilities.
I agree.
I think so.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I was very fortunate to have worked in international business, and then when I came back, before I started teaching at Middlesex, I've taught 2 years full time, mostly international management and business at CCSU, Central Connecticut State University, and I was able to pick up there when my 2 years finished and start here immediately after I finished there. So I taught that, and I worked in international business, and I've done a lot of traveling, had a lot of exposure to other cultures. So I think students have something to gain from that, and also the international relations class that I've taught a couple times so far. I think that experience is valuable to them, and they have something to gain by taking those classes at Middlesex Community College.
Well, I think we're always, actually impacted day in and day out by the rest of the globe, even if we think that we are just living here in the middle of Connecticut. And so it gives you a toolkit in understanding things as they happen, and things happen all the time. I mean, for example, today I read that the renminbi was being devalued slightly. Well, why would I care about that? What does that mean for the American dollar and for the cost of goods and things? And it's helpful to understand that. You also coordinate the legislative internship program. Also incredibly helpful to understand how laws are made and how our government is organized and distributes the taxes that they collect.
Absolutely. I've been very fortunate to have been the campus advisor for that program now for some 7 years, and I can't say enough about how valuable that is to every student who goes through that program. They spend a couple days per week up at the Capitol. They get 6 credits for doing that. They don't spend any time in an old-fashioned classroom here at Middlesex, but they learn things, mostly things that you can't learn in a classroom, how laws are made and the ins and outs of how our government works and sometimes doesn't work so well. But you learn those things. It's a kind of education that you just can't get in a classroom, and I do everything I can to help as many students understand this opportunity is available as possible.
So there are so many things that you bring to the classroom and to Middlesex, and I'm so grateful that you're a part of our faculty. And I want to thank you for spending this half hour with me on the radio show, and I invite anybody in the listening audience who's interested in meeting you to come over to Middlesex, call you, email you. You're in the directory on our website. Welcome. That would be great. So if you're interested in learning more about Middlesex in general, you can find us on the web at mxcc.edu. I'm Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, wishing you all a very good day.